Welcome back to the World Lens podcast. I'm Michelle Evans, your host, and I'm here with my co-host, Bruce McIndoe. How are you doing today, Bruce? Are you fully recovered from the Thanksgiving holiday?
Oh, I don't think you'll recover from Thanksgiving for weeks. That's a lot of food.
Indeed.
Yeah, but today's been just, I don't know if you caught, the whole thing overnight with the South Korea declaring martial law
Mm-hmm.
because of the wranglings that are going on in their government. And so just add it to the list.
Of course. Well, today we're going to be covering two different topics. But first, we're going to be revisiting a topic that we discussed in the past, but we're going to do it through a slightly different lens. It's the social media apps. We just kind of can't get away from them. Facebook, X, Instagram, Blue Sky. These platforms are very
You didn't
popular.
mention TikTok. Come on.
Oh, yes, of course. TikTok. How could I forget? It's like the biggest thing right now. But there's also a growing concern about what they're doing to our brains, and the governments are taking action. Let's start by talking about Australia. They just passed the world's most restrictive social media law, prohibiting children under the age of 16 from using their platforms. Pretty basic question to start. How does a ban like this work? It has to be a whole lot more than just putting your birthday in before you enter a website, right?
Um, Actually, so we mentioned that we would talk about this, and they don't know.
Oh, I mean,
So
that's
it's like when
different.
I was reading through this, I'm going, really? So the government says it will rely on some form of biometric or identity ID for age verification technology, right?
Huh.
But the options will be tested in the coming months and they'll figure it out. That's what they've done. So and so it's like, okay, so that was, but there's more. But go ahead.
So they have no plan in place, honestly. They're just kind of like, we're going to try this and see what it
Yeah,
happens. Like,
they're going to throw it out there and say, come up with some solutions in the next year to see how we can, actually do this. And I have a laundry list of things that says that they're not going to be able to do it. So we'll talk about that in a minute.
yeah, so the law itself is really interesting because it specifies that gaming and messaging apps are exempt. So are the websites you can access without an account. Basically, it's a pretty broad ban, but with some broad cutouts as well. Does it seem like the Australian politicians are playing favorites, or is it really more about getting something in place and then just seeing how it all plays out?
I think it's the latter
Hmm.
because the legislation actually does not specify what platforms will be banned, right? They've left it up to the communications minister to sort that out. So they handed him the hot potato, right?
Yeah.
Actually, it might be a her. But anyway, um, so what I saw that they did mention this, gaming and messaging, would be potentially set aside, kind of thing, or it will be.
Hmm.
But the minister did say, well, she expected, I guess it is she, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all the ones that you mentioned would be that would be their position going in. So that's what's caused all the excitement in Silicon Valley and all the other countries. TikTok. I
Hmm.
mean, this is a bigger threat to TikTok than the U.S. ever will be, right?
Yeah.
We do know that this is not good for children, and I was
Hmm.
looking online last night in Germany. They did a poll of Germans. I think it was 2 or 3 thousand, respondents, and 77% of them said they wanted some control over youth and social media. Right
Hmm.
now, what that control means, as we can see here, who knows? But I think parents they see their children, just being sucked into this environment and like go out and play.
Seriously. You mentioned how Germany, like a poll suggested that most of the parents are for it, and
Hmm.
similarly, this happened in Australia. Majority of parents are in favor of the ban. Other countries as well, like Norway, the UK, they're
Hmm.
going to be watching this implementation like really closely because they're thinking about doing it, do you think that other countries are going to follow suit along with them?
I can assure you that other countries are now going to sit back and see what happens.
They're sitting back with their popcorn.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, all right, guys, way to take the arrows, right? The pioneers get the arrows in your back, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think they're going to see how big of a mess this ends up being. What kind of issues come up. What are the technology solutions? How are the technology companies going to weigh in on this? And
Hmm.
I mean, they're talking about it. Was it a 30 or $50 million fine or something if the tech companies don't support it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's what that's going to happen. Now, if this all gets sorted, I shouldn't say all, but if it mostly gets sorted, right,
Hmm.
then I think you will see dominoes fall, and that's why the social media companies are just like going crazy right now, right? Because it's like, how do we deal with this? But anyway, so I think everyone's going to step back and kind of use the Aussie experiment to do nothing for now, and we'll see what happens. Right?
So the law doesn't go into effect for another 12 months. What should we be watching for in that time? Lobbying to undo it, court challenges, possibly early adoption by the platforms kind of looking to get ahead of it.
So that's the movie, right? It's all of that. It'll be. It's just going to be crazy. You have very powerful, wealthy companies, right? That are going to be putting pressure on this. In Australia, yeah, there's a lot of people that do, but then there's youth groups. They were all up in arms because they were never consulted. You have there's no parental exemption, so you have parents that are like, well, I don't care that 70% of the people want this. There are 30% of us that don't want it, right? We want to let
Right.
our kids. So all of that is just going to become this just pot of getting stirred, and so I think that what I've seen just when I looked this morning and kind of some of the discourse rooms, they're
Hmm.
starting to poke holes in the plan and undermine it. And for example, on the technology side, one of the things on the list is, what if a young child like installs a VPN and they're coming from Singapore?
Hmm.
What is the platform going to do about that? They can't like say, oh well, that's
Yeah. It's
somebody
hard to
else.
track.
and
Yeah.
and and so that's where this biometric, like, okay, I'm going to do some facial recognition or whatever, so that if you do come from Singapore, but then really you're going to take my child and you're going to database their image and
That's
do
what I
bio
was about to ask.
anyway, it's layer on layer of just, it's going to be a really interesting mess.
It
So
seems like it would cost their government a ton of money along with all this.
in what sense?
With just like all the data gathering, the biometrics, and trying to get everything kind of like aligned.
Oh, I think I mean, if you kind of read it, they're putting that on the plate of the technology company,
Mm,
right? Not the government. So again, like, yeah, what you're saying is, who's going to pay for this? Add it to the list.
exactly. Hmm. So let's bring it back here to the US. A similar law, House Bill 3, is going to effect in Georgia on January 1st. This one seeks to prevent children under the age of 18 from making social accounts on certain platforms, but it also gives the parents consent to 14 and 15-year-olds to have accounts. It's a different situation than in Australia, and we're already seeing First Amendment challenges. What are the odds that this sticks? It seems kind of broad.
Bottom line up front, I seriously doubt the law stands with so many detractors and issues that it's going to generate. What are you going to do? Like, if your child comes and says, "Mom, all my friends are on, and I'm not on, and come on," and it's just going to like put pressure on those parents that like don't want them, but what are they going to do? It's like it becomes battle royale with your child. And that's why the Aussie one, it's like, okay, the parents are out of it, so at
Hmm.
least they can step back and say, oh, the government's doing this for your, it's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
universal health care, right? Universal. protecting you from, and it gives parents cover. But when you give parents where the kids know that they can say, I
Persuade their
think,
parents,
yeah, then you're going to have a lot of other friction. So
creating some household tensions.
yeah.
So, one of those lawsuits compares social media access restrictions to similar concerns about books and movies and video games in the past. It seems that social media is just like a different beast altogether. Why does it feel so different in this case?
Well, yeah, social media is a very different beast than these kind of like tangible use
Hmm.
products, right? Um, the first challenge is these sites are free,
Yeah.
right? Because that's why they want to keep those, they make money by keeping people's on the platform and going through, not sitting on reading a book on the platform, but scrolling through so they can pop those ads up, right?
Hmm.
That's what it's all about, and which is what it's the damaging part. So yeah, so it is a very kind of different issue versus saying, getting a movie or watching a movie or getting a book and reading a book. It's a very different, and the algorithms that are there. That's the heart of the issue, right? And that's what concerns me when as we approach this. It's like, let's go focus on the problem, not try to create this police force of parents and governments to try to like have the kids not interact with the problem, right? And so those algorithms and what they're designed to do are the problem, and that's what needs to be addressed. And
So this also brings us back to the TikTok ban. Here, Donald Trump is about to enter office, and despite his initial attempts to ban it in 2020, it's looking a little different now. His cabinet picks have a wide array of views on this, but Trump seems ready to combat China through all sorts of policies. And because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, they're probably on his list. Um, Bruce, pull out that crystal ball for me. Is there any chance that this TikTok ban is going to be overturned?
I guess there's not much of a crystal ball. I mean, Mr. Trump has always been transactional in the way that he deals with people and things, right? So regardless of whether he's in an office or not. So if I don't, I don't, again, they're not, the cabinet people aren't going to have influence on him. He'll hear their noise or whatever, but it's going to come down to like, he's the decider, and then he's going to decide, and then they're going to fall in line. So from that perspective, so then what would he decide? What he has said, and I
Yeah.
think through this whole campaign, we need to take him at his word. He is on a tear to want to unwind
Hmm.
everything that Biden has done. Okay, now he uses that thing, everything. Well, it won't be
Right.
everything, but this is one thing, right? So he could simply say, no, kill
Hmm.
it. We're not going to ban TikTok. Done. Right. And so I think
Hmm.
that kind of thing is very likely, and probably the most likely outcome, that he'll just kill it because Biden did it.
Yeah. So pretty much just out of spite.
Yeah, it's not really spite. I think that you know, it's one of those things like blow up the system, see where the pieces fall, and then put it back together. That's kind of this model that I get a sense that they're on a path to try to do.
We shall see in the coming months. All right. So let's pivot away from social media to a more immediate active conflict. Protests have upended the country of Georgia after the current government delayed a bid to join the European Union. How did Georgia get here? Why is this such a significant moment?
So, as you know, I spent a lot of time with geopolitics, but also history.
Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because it's a lot of people that aren't paying attention to these kinds of things, and I don't blame them because it's mind numbing. We need to put a few things in perspective. Sir, first off, Georgia as a country has the same population as LA. Our Georgia is more than twice the size
Hmm.
of the country of Georgia. Okay, so you have to put this in that little vessel that says, this is what we're dealing with. This is like LA with a little bit more land mass is this group of people. But then you have to say, okay, well, how did they get here? Well, Georgia has been around in one form or another for 8,000 years. Okay. So, and like in the 19th century, when they were annexed by the Russian Empire, right? It's like that was a result of the bloody revolution in 1917, right? Right in the whole First World War. And then they declared independence in 1918, and that lasted for a while. And then Russians invaded them, and then they had demonstrations and strikes all through all of that and into the 1990s, and declared independence. And then there was so this upheaval and social unrest and protests around the government, and this tug of war between Russia and other entities, other empires, in this case right now EU, has been their life. Right. So this is just one episode in a long, long history of struggles for the Georgians.
Wow. But it sounds like majority of Georgians support joining the EU. Why would the government kind of step away from it?
Yeah, I guess that gets back, like, what was the significant moment, right? Right, like what caused this uprising is exactly that. Is that in 2023 the EU granted Georgia candidate status that says, look, we are willing to welcome you in. You just need to start going through the process and join the EU, right? So that was all really exciting, and but then when the government, pivoted away from that last week, then that's what triggered all this unrest. So, and again, we're kind of talking about parental. How many parents want to support that? It's like 80% of the
Yeah.
Georgians want to be in the EU. So yeah, so it's like 20% of the people driving them away from the EU, and 80% of the people saying, what are you talking about? We just got candidate status. And so this is why they're so, kind of like just lost it. It's like, this is crazy, right? So this all comes down to leadership, right? So the prime minister, when he said that he would suspend that, it's like, well, he's viewed as a pro-Russian leader that's in that role, right? And so that then starts bringing in the international, the U.S. and the EU and the Western versus Russia and their
Right.
cohort. And we've seen there has been this deterioration of relationships with the West, and so this is all getting all wrapped up in all of that, in a very difficult time. And the crackdowns that they had around the protesters were just really, really abhorrent. So that's again another reason the West broadly is weighing in on this.
Yeah. You mentioned before how Georgia is a former Soviet state and that they were invaded by Russia in 2008. Does it look like the current Russian government is kind of meddling to kind of get the results they want in Georgia?
There is always some level of Russian meddling when it comes to being a post-Soviet state.
Yeah.
So that's a given. I think in the case of Georgia, it's really, I think the focal of this is this kind of anti-West, anti-US, anti-EU leader, right? That
Hmm.
wants to stay in power and achieve his ends, and not respect the will of 80% of the country. And so the Soviets are very adept at looking at power vacuums, or in this case, fractures, and
Hmm.
exacerbating them. And they are masters at that. And I'm sure that they are actively engaged in information operations. Absolutely.
So, what does this, if anything, say about what's going on in the Ukraine?
Um, I guess there's probably two answers to that question. So we have to roll back time again. It's like, okay, in 2022, when the Russians mobilized around the war in Ukraine, about, I don't know, 1.5 million Russians went to Georgia.
Hmm.
I don't know how many stayed there, but that's created a lot of internal friction when you
Yeah.
have, it's like your, brother-in-law and his kids coming to your house for Thanksgiving and not leaving until 2026.
Yeah. That would definitely create some issues.
Anyway, so that is an issue, right? So how they feel and how they're kind of dealing with that.
Hmm.
The other is, yeah, is this, again, I'll go back to kind of information operations where, you've got Russian statements, through proxies, not coming from Putin or any official, but, drawing parallels to the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, right? That,
Hmm.
began with Yanukovych when he was president. And that, basically, as they signed that agreement with the EU, and look where that ended up, right?
Yeah.
And they said, I think, quote, I put the quote in here: moving rapidly along the Ukrainian path into the dark abyss. Usually, this sort of thing ends very badly, right? So that's,
Yeah.
again, that Russian information operations where they're injecting this in to basically say, be cautious because you could end up like Ukraine, right?
Sheesh. Yeah. It's ominous.
It is, yeah.
So there's a bigger conversation here about Russia's growing influence in world politics.
Hmm.
As you say, we're obviously just kind of approaching this thing from the West, but why are these countries kind of leaning towards aligning back with Russia?
It's Russian influence is greatest in countries who have authoritarian leaders.
Yeah.
And we see that with North Korea and Iran, and all
Hmm.
over in Africa, all over. And because what do they have? They give them weapons,
Yeah.
they give them resources, minerals and oil and all that kind of stuff. They have the UN veto and the Security Council to protect them. They send Russian troops or proxies, mercenaries to,
Hmm.
so they are very much friends of authoritarian leaders, and so that's where they get their influence. It's like, and the West does not support them, and so therefore
We are, yeah.
Russia is our friend, right?
So it seems like the talk of Russia influencing or interfering in elections, it's not going to go away anytime soon. Is the Russian disinformation machine really as strong as some people would suggest, or is it just like an ongoing boogeyman for everyone to blame?
It is very capable.
Mm.
Back in my career, with the intelligence community, as the internet came online, that was an amazing tool for the Russians and their disinformation and influence campaigns, and they
Mm.
have mastered that over the decades.
Yeah.
Social media and everything else that's exploded since the mid late '90s. So they are very, very capable, and they know how to, like I said, exploit those weaknesses that form in countries,
Hmm.
and pit one side against the other and try to escalate that to create. Because if you have unrest in the populace, of course you need a strong man to solve it and keep
Right.
everybody under control, right? So it kind of feeds into that whole narrative. So yeah, they are, not a boogeyman. They're extremely capable at the, what they're doing, and they've done it in many countries around the world. And I am 100% confident, because of my background and the research that I do, that that includes here in the U.S. That they are a big part of this fractured society that we have has been not solely, but it's been inflamed by
Hmm.
outside influencers, and they are, number one.
As you mentioned, just a quick follow up. You mentioned how like they have perfected this over the decades.
Hmm.
Do you see this ever becoming a point where they are stopped or things will change, or do you just see this as like a snowball effect and it's just going to keep becoming a larger issue?
Again, it's not just them. We have
Mm-hmm.
the Iranians and others, some Chinese that all play this, same similar game, right?
Yeah.
So, I think it's like maturing. It's just like having, a child that learns over time, and the U.S. is going to go through some tough times as far as
Mm-hmm.
basically, restructuring and rethinking, how's the government organized and how does it serve the country, and the electorate is going to look at this and decide, is that what they want or not? And if it is
Mm-hmm.
not what they want, luckily and hopefully our elections will hold in the next 2 years and 4 years and on,
Mm-hmm.
where people can make choices. And so they've made this choice to for the have this experiment. Okay, let's see how it rolls out in the next couple of years. They have another shot at the polls in 2 years and can make some adjustments. They have another big shot in 4 years. If the majority of the country feels like this, knock it down and rebuild it is working,
Mm-hmm.
then we'll continue with the experiment.
Very, very interesting topics.
Always.
Well, Bruce, as always, thank you so much for joining me today. If someone wants to connect with you, where should they go?
WTCI or my website, Mackendo Risk Advisory.
And Bruce is also very active on LinkedIn.
Always, and yeah, it's there's my career started many years ago. The world is in my job the most interesting it's ever been in my career, but it's also the most dangerous that it's ever been. So that's always the trade-off in my business.
Well, thank you all for listening. Please visit the World Trade Center Institute online at WTCI.org for more insights, events, and opportunities. And make sure to follow us on all social channels at WTC Institute. Thanks. See you next time.